Welcome to another edition of Overcome Out Loud with Charlie Smith. This is a podcast that I've dedicated to connecting with real people that have overcome real obstacles and challenges in their lives to give other people hope. The stories we've covered are powerful. We've had incredible, vulnerable guests come on to share their overcome stories to give so many hope. You know, so many of us have suffered in silence that by overcoming out loud, we do give other people hope. And today, I am joined by none other than Patrisha McLean. Patrisha is the founder of Finding Our Voices. Talk about overcoming out loud. Finding Our Voices is a nonprofit foundation that Patrisha founded to give sufferers and victims of domestic violence their voice back and to be heard. After her own lengthy battle in an abusive and violent relationship with famed singer Don McLean, Patrisha finally found her voice and is helping so many other people find their voices. Patrisha McLean, welcome to Overcome Out Loud.
Thank you. We have a little history, a wonderful history. I just so enjoyed getting to know you through, I guess, really Facebook mostly, right? And a little back and forth, but I'm looking forward to when we can meet in person.
I know, so am I. And in full disclosure, Patrisha is also a very influential person in our family's lives. She's connected with my mom. They have done an amazing job of spreading hope to people and giving people really a lifeline to reach out to that are suffering from violent domestic relationships. And so I just thank you for everything you're doing, for the connection that you've made to our family and how many people you're helping. And you'll help so many people today because there is so much shame and guilt associated with so many of the things people are struggling with. And I think that's why they do suffer in silence. And so, you know, as we start, if you could kind of give us a little, we don't need to really delve too far into your background, but I do want to understand a little bit about where you came from and how, relationships that seem to start out with such good intentions can go bad so fast. Can you just maybe just share with our audience a little bit about where you come from and
I'll do that.
Yeah, it'd be great.
I just want to, before we say that, something you mentioned just made me think about something. You talked about how I help people, but I remember reaching out to you. It hasn't been on social media because I remember that phone call I made to you because I was going through a really hard time with my daughter. And this is when, just a really, really tough time as far as our relationship and around her, the father and the father's abuse and how she felt about me and all that. And I remember asking you for advice from a child who's been through abuse on how to handle it. I just didn't know what to do, and you were really, your perspective was really invaluable.
Oh, thank you for trusting me. And it is, perspective is everything. And really, I think that's a credit to what we do here and what you've learned here is the power of vulnerability, because I think a lot of people won't call and ask for help. And a lot of people will keep that kind of narrative to themselves and not know what to do with the struggle they're having. So I give really all credit to you.
Well, the only reason I could call you is because you were public about the fact that you grew up in this abuse. I mean, I could have connected with your mother, Mary Lou, and we were going gangbusters. But if you hadn't stepped up to talk about your own experience growing up in it, I could never have called you. So that was opening the door.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And it's turned into something incredible. So thank you.
But going back to answering your question.
Yeah.
Basically, I guess I'd have to go back if this is all about domestic abuse, really, and find my voice. I just would go back, I guess, to growing up. My father had a temper. My mother had a temper. My father was very emotionally distant, and he left our family when I was like, 4 or something. But even then, in those early years, I remember him like smashing a bookcase. I remember him putting me in the car and racing, like terrifying me, because he had a fight with my mother and he would just speed. So even when I was a little girl, I remember that. Then my mother was violent to us physically. She would, abuse us physically and emotionally. And so I guess it starts there. And then it was just a series of boyfriends who were friggin' abusive. I can't even believe it. Like when I got out of my 29-year marriage, it was all about that. I was a victim of, domestic abuse when I opened my eyes to it. But then when I look further back, it started right away. Like basically you know, I was raped at 14, and then abusive boyfriend, abusive boyfriend, abusive boyfriend, and then the marriage, 29 years. So it's been a lifelong thing.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, that's so important. And I'm really glad I do start with origin stories because I think, you know, I'm a student of patterns, and, you know, having, you know, witnessed and been the victim of violent childhood abuse, you know, there was a narrative that was laid down to me about what was okay, what I had to learn to accept to exist in the world. You know, I accepted a whole bunch of truths that weren't really truths and didn't really serve me, but they allowed me to exist in the world. And you witnessed and saw certain behaviors that were laid down for you as, you know, I won't say you thought they were normal, but for you, they seemed normal. They seemed like the way people reacted. There was violence, there was abuse. And so when that comes from the people who are really, given the task from birth to protect us, and that's the way they treat us, that's the way, you know, someone who loves me is treating me this way. It's a really ingrained narrative, and I thank you for really the courage and vulnerability of expressing that, because, you know, when we're young, we don't get to choose the environment that we grow up in, and as we get older, we become, I don't want to say a victim of it, because I know that's a sometimes a word that's used a little indiscretionately, but we are victims of the upbringing that we had when we couldn't control it. And it really does establish a pattern. And so, you know, because you know, I say, when I look at you now, and I look at what you do now, it is hard to believe, you know, that a woman as strong as you had those kind of relationships. But when you don't know any different, you know, you don't know any different. And so you got into those relationships. Did they start in abusive ways, or was there a period of time when you were experiencing kind of what you always kind of that fairy tale relationship that we all think about?
Well, I think one thing is I was very drawn to confident guys, you know, cocky, confident. And that's interesting that I hear that from a lot of women who talk to me about what they've been through. When they talk about meeting the guy, it's almost always that tell me, you know, if they want to describe him, confident to the point of cocky, arrogant. So maybe I feel like I like lack of self-esteem, and maybe so I was looking for, I didn't have any confidence. So if I saw someone who had confidence, I was drawn to that. So that's the thing I remember about these guys mostly, as far as the early ones. Like my first boyfriend, you know, I can't say, I don't know when the abuse started, but very confident, and then controlling. It was a high school thing. So it was just super controlling, as far as like, you can't hang out with this person. And then yeah, animal abuse, and oh my God, it was horrible. So it was just, I accepted this, you know, because I just felt like I was lucky to have this guy, because he was so popular. So, you know, I was just in love with them, and I just felt I was the lucky one to have them, which is crazy.
Yeah, no, it really isn't. I mean, you know, self-esteem and self-confidence, you know, that feeling, that deep down feeling of inside that we're good. When we attach, you know, when we don't have that growing up, I think in a kind of disassociated world where we lose touch with ourselves. I mean, we've got to start to disassociate from what's happening in our house. We've got to disassociate from what's happening with our parents. We tend to create these false selves, and so we really don't get to know ourselves. So there is no self-esteem. You know, we're really kind of drawn to other things that we attach to get our self-worth from, whether it be relationships or money or sex or drugs, or, you know, whatever we can find to escape the realities. And so this pattern of low self-esteem and then attaching our self-worth to another human being, you know, even if it's not in our best interest, it really is not crazy. It seems it seems like a natural progression. And I think one of the things that this podcast is committed to, and one of the things that you are so incredible at doing, is being so open and vulnerable, of saying, I lacked self-esteem. I attached my self-esteem to men. I picked confident men, because when we say that, we're really allowing others to see these red flags, to say, you know what? I'm accepting behavior that I shouldn't be because of the way I feel about me. I better start changing how I feel and what I accept. And I think that's one of the most, because a lot of men, women, people in general don't want to identify their weaknesses, but really, if you don't identify them, how can you address them? So I
Well,
thank you for
that's
that.
true. And that's an important part in it, is my part in it. You know, I accepted that behavior. I accepted that behavior from these guys, you know, one after the other, and into this whole marriage, you know, that thing. So it's not like, you know, there is that, you know, to accepting that, because no one needs to accept that stuff. There's the door, you could walk up the door early on. It does get harder and harder, of course. And then, you know, for a host of reasons, but there usually is the door that you can open, but it's the psychological trap you're in. And yeah.
Yeah. So what do we learn from the early marriage? I mean, obviously now you've gone through these abusive relationships, abusive boyfriend after abusive boyfriend. And now of course you start, ultimately dating, Don. And was that a fairy tale at the beginning? Was there any red warnings looking back that you could point out to people, or was it a relationship that started with kind of the sweeping you off your feet, as some do?
Well, I think that because of that background that I had, I think I was very susceptible to him because it had been very difficult for me, the series of very difficult relationships and not good ones. When I met him, it did seem like he was a Prince Charming. He did seem like he was the knight in shining armor. Like it was like a dream, because just the way he just you know, was so hyper focused on me. He told me he loved me that first night we met, and I don't know, it was like a dream. But looking back on it, what are the red flags? If a person tells you they love you the first night, to me that's a red flag. You know, right
Yes.
away they're talking marriage. Like he was within a week or two, he was talking about me moving back east with him. Like, to me, that's a red flag. Like, I didn't see it at the time. I was really excited about it, but things shouldn't be moving that quickly. And the other thing, no friends. Like, he didn't have any friends. He lived, you know, how could it be that he's an entertainer with, you know, so many people in the music business all around? He didn't have one friend in the music business. He didn't have any friends. Also, he was estranged from every friggin' family member, you know? My mother even, it was weird because I was looking through, my mother died recently, and we were looking through the letters and everything that she had kept. And I found this note that she had written my sister. And she said in it that it was written before I married Don, that she thought that he was mentally ill because he was estranged from his nephew, and he was estranged from everybody. Like, what normal person is estranged from everybody? But she never voiced that to me while she was living. And I started to think about that. Like, I always thought she adored him and, you know, looked up to him and was really excited that I was with him. I think if more people would express reservations, that would be helpful, you know? So there were all these things, but, you know, if I had the power and control wheel then, and I saw, you know, how they isolate you, how, you know, all that stuff, I would hope it would make a difference. But on the other hand, maybe not, because, you know, when you're hungry for love, you believe lies, right? I was hungry for love. I was really, you know, hungry for like excitement and all that stuff. And so even if I had known, maybe I would have stayed blind to it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great observation. I mean, I think the acts of self-esteem, you know, all of the whacks that your self-esteem had taken through these abusive relationships left you very, I think you used the term susceptible to him. And, you know, your self-esteem wound was so big, you know, it starts in childhood and it continues through these abusive relationships. And so, you know, I think you had that low self-esteem and were very susceptible to the control. So you know, what lens you look at that through, I think hindsight obviously is perfect, but I think it's really important for people to understand, you know, how at the time, you know, it became the new normal for you because you were attached to, you know, your self-worth was attached to somebody else. So you do, in a way, you avoid looking at all the blind spots. You don't see them as blind spots. You just see what you want to see. When you say that again, when you're hungry for love, you'll believe lies. Is that what you said?
When you're hungry for lies, you eat when you're hungry for love, you eat lies. There's something like that really resonated with me.
Yeah.
The other thing that happened with Don, which was really interesting, and the other thing I would tell women, like, maintain your independence at that's the most important thing. So when I met him, I was a newspaper reporter in San Francisco. I had an apartment, you know, nice apartment. I had a car, of course. I had a job, and but more than a job, I had a career. I was a newspaper reporter. I was very proud of that. I always wanted to do that, and I was winning awards, like state awards, for my writing. And so then when I met him, and as I said, he swept me off my feet, and right away he's talking about me moving back east with him. Like I ended up. I remember it was hard for me to make that decision because I was working on something. I was achieving something. My career was important to me. My independence was important to me. So I did debate that. But in the end, I just love one out, and I just said, okay, I'll move back east with you. So this was in October. We met in August. So 2 months or something. So I sold my car. I gave up my apartment. I quit my job. The day I got back from having quit my job, last day of work, no car, no apartment, nothing. We're going to move back east the next day together. I saw his temper for the first time. And I remember, like, I couldn't believe it because it was so unlike the Don that I knew. Like, up until then, it had been just, writing me love notes. I'm going to treat you like a flower and a baby, which was a red flag in a way. Like, you don't want a man who's going to treat you like a baby. But at the time, I thought that was romantic. But it was just all like flowers and everything. And then all of a sudden, this temper, like he just like flipped out over nothing. But I remember, like, almost going into a state where I was just blocking it out. Like I said, no, this can't be. And then I was just like making excuses. Well, it's very stressful for him because, this is a big step that he's taking. And also I really was trapped, I felt, because I had told everybody that I was moving back east with this famous singer. Everyone was excited. A few people were excited for me, and I was embarking on this fantasy, and it was just like a fairy tale. And I didn't have anything. I didn't have a job. I had nothing. So that was where I felt I was trapped. I mean, at that moment I could have said, but all the benefit of the doubt was going to be there for him because of the circumstances at that point.
Yeah, you were I mean, we're just going to go back to when you're hungry for love, you eat lies. And, I think when I hear this, because, you could imagine a young couple with a very popular, celebrity singer and a young wife. And, we're going to make a decision to live our life this way. And couples do that all the time. They move together. They decide, one job can get replaced somewhere else and you can be a writer anywhere. And, they sit down and they talk about that. But what I hear is Patricia's life getting smaller and Don's life getting bigger.
Oh my God, that is so true. You nailed it. That's exactly it. That's the problem. Not only that, I didn't even mention one other thing, that I had all the stuff that I had been carrying around with me since I'd left home at 19 to work my way up in the newspaper industry. So I had all my newspaper clippings. I had my poetry. I had my writing. I had my photos. And I'd been carrying them around with me place to place as I moved around the state for these jobs. And so the day before, like I put everything into 2 boxes. So one box I'm going to keep and take back east with me. The other box, could be thrown out. So I came back from work and, the last day, and I was like, where is that? There was one box that I wanted to take back with me, all those things that define me up until that moment in my life. He said, they're in the dumpster. He threw it in the dumpster. And I said, what? And he's like, oh, I thought that was the garbage box. I never asked him to throw anything away. And it was purposeful. He erased me. And so at that moment, I didn't have a past. It was just him. And that defined the relationship. The relationship was, and you can relate, I'm sure, to what it was like in your home with your father. They're everything. Like, they're the whole world. Like, everything revolves around them. They're the sun god, sun king, right?
Yeah.
I mean, no sun, because there's nothing sunny about it. But I mean, can you relate to that, to growing up with one person in an absolute, everyone enthralled to that one person?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's that undercurrent of narcissism, which is my interests are the only interests in the family that matters, whether it's my singing career or my teaching profession or the things that I like to do. These are the things that we're all going to gravitate to. And anything that threatens that is not just dismissed, it's fucking crushed. I mean, it's, anything that threatens, the narcissist world, the controlling party's world cannot exist. I mean, it really gets snuffed out. In at least that was, what I experienced was, whether I wanted to play football and he wanted me to be on the debate team, football was not an option. Football was snuffed out. It was not just dismissed, it was crushed as an option because it wasn't consistent with what he wanted. And that's, kind of, I think what you're alluding to is how, again, Patricia's life became small and Don's life became the only life that matters. And then you get sucked in. It's like a bit of a vortex. You get sucked into that life as it becomes more and more of your identity, but you've lost, you've lost your voice.
I lost my voice. And what's interesting too is that he has this girlfriend, which is ridiculous. He was 69. He took up with this 19-year-old, and they're still together. But in the beginning, it was really interesting. She's like an Instagram hottie, so she has got like 500,000 views because she poses like almost naked. And that's her thing. She just naked photos, basically. So in the beginning, but she is promoting herself. Like that's her thing, so it was all about, her, if you look at her Instagram, it was all about her, and promoting herself and the different things like she was a groupie, so she was mentioning these different guys that she loved, but it was part of her thing, her shtick, And then I remember like, because there was a little overlap there. So my ex would say, I'm gonna, like he was helping her with her career, like supposedly his contacts were gonna help her. But then I watched as it became all about him. So the same thing happened in that circumstance. In the beginning, she had this thing going, and she had some, for whatever it was, and he was going to help her, but no sooner did she get connected to him and, committed and everything and whatever, trapped, whatever. And then it was all about him, her wearing like his t-shirts, her talking about him. It was just an interesting thing to observe because I just related to that because that's what happened to me. I had a picture of myself in his t-shirts, and it was all about like, he just seems so important. And, I did lose my voice for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I go back. I remember my own mother, and I know you've heard it. I mean, what color she wanted to paint her room was of great controversy, and if it wasn't the color he wanted, then it was, a subject of an eruption. And that's why I really find it really important to emphasize that first flare up of his temper, you really can't pin. It wasn't like some major event happened, like you bounced the last big check or, you crashed the car into the side of the, I mean, it's like there's something trivial that happened, but the anger was there and the fuse was lit. And so I'm assuming, but you'll tell us more, the progression of getting sucked into the vortex of the relationship and the escalation of the violence. And then obviously the introduction of children into the family and how that dynamic continued to shift in favor of the abuser and at the expense of the family.
Well, I mean, I'll put this to you. I mean, can you remember anything that set him off? Like can you say, oh, this set him off because it was, as you said, you can never remember what set them off because it was so inconsequential.
That's right. Absolutely. No, the answer is no. I mean, I can remember, that they were, as you describe, there was no punishment that fit the crime. The paprika being left out on the counter, would get you a black eye. And it's, what about the paprika? I mean, I don't even fucking like paprika. I don't even think I took the paprika out, but next thing you know, I've got the bloody nose. But again, I mean, that's just the nature of domestic violence. That's the nature of abuse. It's controlling, it's unpredictable. It's not post-traumatic stress. It's complex trauma. It's unpredictable. It occurs regularly. And there really is no way to anticipate it. And so you stay, and this is, what I'm drawing a little bit of a parallel, but I'm assuming you stay on high alert. You stay, I think people would use the term walking on eggshells because there is no clear path to, if I do this, then this won't happen. Although that's what we're trying to do, or at least I believe, from hearing you and my mother both speak about the roles you were playing was, this kind of peace at any cost. If I do this, I can anticipate, but we're really just walking on eggshells.
Well, I mean, two incidents I remember. One of them, these are all very early. This one was before we had children. And we were going to go to a Frank Sinatra concert in the city. and I was really excited. We were going to go to Lutèce, like a really famous restaurant in New York City, getting dressed up, you know, and heading out. And I reached into the closet to get my coat, and the hanger fell. And he's like, "Are you going to pick that up?" And I said, "Yeah, I was just about to, because maybe I was going to put my coat on first and pick it up. Who knows?" And he said, "No, you weren't." And I said, "Yeah, I was just about to pick the hanger up." He says, "No, you weren't. You know, you weren't going to pick the hanger up. Why don't you just admit it?" I mean, that started this. I would say, I just remember it was like a rampage, because back then the rampages were like 3 days. So basically, it was 3 days of hell. It was 3 days of The Exorcist. You know, if you've ever seen that movie, that's what it was like. Like, it was just like verbal vomit from him. It was just calling me these things that I was like I never heard such. I don't know what to say, is bile, you know, from like, just to show how rotten his inside was, that he would put these things out and say those things about me. And then the physical thing, like just assaulting me for like 3 days. And it was so scary. And so there you have it. I mean, but then I would look back and I would be like, what should I have done? Like, I should have said this. I should have, like, it would be, what did I do? What didn't I do? And next time I have to, you know, so it's all about what I need to do. And it's, first of all, it's so crazy. You don't even say to yourself, this is just ridiculous, I'm out of here. It's like you're trying to understand, you know, you're trying to grasp it, because you don't get that this is a pattern. This is what these guys do. They act crazy, and and it's all about control, and it's all about, you know, yeah, I don't know.
How you actually do know it. You just said it. It's all about control, and it's not about the appearance of control. It's about actual control. So, you know, words are tools. You know, they can be, you know, beautiful poetry, or they can be, you know, vile condemnation and abusive, and words can be some of the most abusive, hurtful things that someone can use. And then you combine that with physical, and all it's doing is surrounding you with the control of the abuser. And then usually what happens is what it's the flowers and the "I'm sorry and I won't do this again." I mean,
No,
are you getting to that?
We didn't have that. I never had that. And the other thing which was strange about, I don't know how much, if you could relate to this, but he had that other side of him. Well, you know, people know him for sensitive songs, and he occasionally would write me these letters, and they'd be written in the most beautiful script he learned from his grandmother, you know, and it would be the most beautiful handwriting, and saying like very poetic things to me. And then of course there were his songs that I listened to more and more as we were together, and just so tender and sensitive and sweet. So that was part of it, which is like, they're not a total monster. They have that side to them. So then that's confusing also. Like, was your father, did he have a sensitive side to him?
No, he had a academic side of him. He had a personality, you know. So as you described, your ex-husband, who's an entertainer and a songwriter, he had his, you know, kind of theatrical, kind of lyrical presence that showed that side of him. My father was an academic. He was a college professor. So he had that very, you know, blazer and tie, you know, very academic appearance to the outside world. So it would be, you know, I guess in essence, you know, the same manifestation of a double life, the same manifestation of an alternate personality. Your ex-husband manifested in the form of entertainer, songwriter, lyrical poet. My father was academic, professional, college professor, you know, students in the house. And so, yeah. And you would see that side of me, like, who the fuck is this guy? You know, I mean,
Right.
I'd like a piece of this guy. I mean, this,
or that, you know, that exists. And so you're like, why aren't I getting that? Like, what am I doing wrong to be not having access to that side of him?
Bam.
But then
what am I doing wrong? And I think, you know, if you're listening, that is a threshold observation, because the answer is nothing. The answer is you're doing nothing that warrants the behavior that you're getting. And I think that's a trap that we fall into as victims of domestic violence, is what am I doing wrong? What can I do to make this right? Versus that behavior is unacceptable. And we'll talk a little bit about the role of protecting, you know, children in this environment. But yeah, that's a great narrative. And thank you for bringing that up, because that is a cycle people fall into, which is, you know, I must be doing something. If this person can be that way here, then how do I obtain that person? But really, if I obtain that person loses control. So I'll never get that guy. You'll never get that guy.
Well, there were times, and that's the other thing is like, you want to go back to those times, because when he wasn't like that, then it would be great. Like, he'd be super fun, boyish, and but I was never comfortable. I was never relaxed. I was always on edge. And you asked about the honeymoon thing. We didn't have that in our relationship. What would happen would be, he would, as I said, I'd wake up in the morning, having cried all night. He would just be right at it again on me, all day long, well, actually, if the cycle was that all of a sudden everything would be great, but then he would just start to get testy, and he would start to, I couldn't do anything right, so he would just like pick up on stupid little things and go after me for them. And that would really make me worried, because I could see it building. And then there'd be that blow up. Then there'd be like the rampage. If I didn't stop it in time, again, like if I was not able to stop it, by doing whatever I had to do to just pull it back in, then the switch would flip. He'd become the monster. And then it would be like 3 or 4 days of absolute hell. And then we wake up in one of the mornings, and I would be a wreck because of what I've just gone through. And he'd look at me and say something like, "Oh, so you're going to pout all day, or you're going to have that attitude all day?" So that was the sign that, and right away I would be like having to like plaster a smile on or something, because I wanted it to end. And that was the, okay, so if I pretend like nothing happened, then things can start to go back to normal. So that's what would happen. He would say that, I would just say, force a smile on my face. And then it would be a little time during the day, and then gradually going back to, boyish, fun Dawn, until it was almost like a moon cycle. It seemed to me like it was every month that would happen. It would start all over again.
Yeah. And so is that an accurate depiction of walking on eggshells? Is that what the family starts to do?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, yeah, the weird thing is that, do you bring children? I talked to a woman very recently. She told me she always wanted 2 children. She had 1 child, and because of the way he treated that child and her, and what was going on in the house, she consciously did not have another child. She didn't want to have another child in that home, but she was in it for 49 years, and her first child was in it for the whole still,
Yeah.
So then she made a decision. She knew enough about what was going on and how bad it was that imagine that, denying herself another child. So that's the thing. Like, it's almost like if someone's in war, like if you're living in Iraq, during the war, do you have a child? Do you bring a child into that? I guess that's the decision, do you bring a child into it? But then I think I felt, I don't know, I felt like, I don't know, I just felt like the child would help us, because I thought that, if we have a baby, he'd love the baby, and we'd be happy. And then
I think that's very common, by the way. I mean, I think a lot of people feel very engaged in the fact that a loving baby, an innocent child, is going to kind of help this situation. It's just another kind of innocent life that is going to thrive and be loved. And I think, at least if I were to guess, how and I never asked my mother this, but I think the perception is that I'm going to drop this child into the calm waters, into that period between the erupting violence and the next episode, is this kind of eye of the hurricane, this quiet calm, and that's where the kid's going to live. The kid's going to live in this kind of boyish Don, we're a family, and for periods of time, that's exactly where the kid lives, but it doesn't stay there.
Well, my daughter she said that she says that she never witnessed any physical abuse, but she said that she felt like it was a matter of life or death in the house. She felt that there was, and so she picked up on that. Like, she picked up on that, how heavy that was in the house, that, what was going on. And oh my God, like, I guess I felt like she wasn't, like, it happened at night a lot of times. So I thought that she didn't hear it,
But there's an energy in the house. I mean,
well, that's what it was.
in an abusive, in a domestic violence ridden house, there is a heavy, at least, I could tell you from my standpoint, there is a heavy energy, a dark cloud, a threatening cloud that looms, and you never, I just remember this when my father would go away on a conference or a trip, that the end, we'd have a little sugared cereal, mom would buy these special groceries. It would be like we'd watch movies, and it was like that energy dissipated the further he got away from, 14 Thomas Drive or 32 Clearview Lane. I mean,
You still never talked about it though.
No, you never talked about it, but they do bring the energy, the energy, the vibration of the house in the presence of the abuser is definitely dark, and it's heavy, and it's threatening. That's how I describe it.
It is, but it's so interesting that, like, that's another thing my daughter said, is that the only time, we're only now really, after I left him, we could start talking about him, like the elephant in the room that's causing all this chaos and distress. But isn't it interesting that even when, he was away, it's not like the kids and I had this conversation, like, it's a lot nicer without your father or anything like that. Like, we just never talked about that at all.
Oh yeah. I mean, that is, I mean, if you were to talk to any therapist about dysfunctional families, I mean, there's three primary rules: don't talk, don't feel, don't tell. I mean, and that doesn't change when the abuser's not there. I mean, you learn to really just stay closed off. You might feel a little free. The threat might be gone. It's still the waters are still there, and the storm can perk up as soon as they come home. But yeah, you definitely don't talk about it. But that energy, like a blanket, does sit over everybody in the family. But there is no talking about it. Absolutely not.
Like, I remember going to out to a restaurant with him. So me and the kids would be sitting at a restaurant, and the whole meal, like, we were so on edge, like terrified that one of the kids is going to knock over a glass of water. And he was always jumping on it, like anytime anything looked like it was going to happen. And I don't know, like, looking back, like, I never thought to just say, like it was so crazy, and it's so unfair to the kids, and it's so horrible. Like, who freaking cares? I mean, you knock a glass over, fine. But that was never voiced. And it was just like, but then I'm complicit because I'm sitting there as a mother, and I'm also, like, really worried that a glass is going to be knocked over. So that's normal to them, right?
Yes, very. And as this progressed, I mean, let's kind of move to how hard it was to finally leave. I mean, you had an event, you finally, and I don't, you'll share with us what it was for you that was, enough is enough. Because I think a lot of people, as you described, take longer because they do feel trapped. And I think this podcast and finding our voices and the things that you're doing to bring awareness to these feelings and what people can do is so powerful. But the end was, I know, very difficult, and speaks volumes about the challenges of prosecuting domestic violence, about how the perpetrators of domestic violence, especially as it relates to celebrity status, can be handled. I mean, so you finally had to face all of that. There was an event that occurred where, you said enough was enough, and tell us a little bit about kind of that line in the sand, how it got crossed, and where you found the courage to finally, take a stand.
Well, I didn't really say enough is enough. Basically, I called 911 at the second that I thought he was going to kill me. I thankfully had my phone in the bathroom with me with the door locked, and he was just shoving against it, and the door was splintering it, and he basically broke through the door, yelling out murderous threats. And so when I saw him, basically breaking through the door, I pressed 911. I had 911. I kept saying, I'm going to call 911. I'm going to call 911. Stop. And when he was basically breaking through the door, I pressed it, and 911 operator came on the phone. And I just remember that second where we're in the bathroom, basically the broken door. And this has been like 4 hours of terrorizing me and physically assaulting me, leading to this. And then I'm just like holding the phone, and the operator's like, this is 911, can I help you? And I'm looking at him, and like 5 seconds earlier, he was like in a murderous homicidal rage. And now he's just like these puppy dog eyes, right? Looking right at me, like, and so I was like, everything's fine, and they came anyway. And then I still said, everything's fine, and please don't arrest him. I don't know. They made an arrest. That's what happened. They made an arrest. And then there were headlines the next day about the arrest. And then my statement for the protection from abuse order was uncovered, and that was blasted all over the paper, you know, with the details of what I'd gone through the past 30 years. And so it was just all just put out in the public, really nothing to do with me really at all. And then he just continued to be so mean, because he had bail conditions of no contact, and I just needed to get my things out of the house. It was a separation at this point, right? So we weren't talking. He got the house. I was roaming around trying to rent places. I mean, I feel like we might have gotten back together because I felt I loved him, and I couldn't imagine living without him. But the court thing had to play out. But then I just needed to get back to the house to get my things. Like, I had an exhibit coming up. I needed my photos. I needed clothes. And on one hand, he was sending these messages of love through my own lawyer said, "Oh, Don's lawyer has a message for you that he's pining for you." My own lawyer told me that, third party contact. So on one hand, he was doing that crap. And on the other hand, he like wouldn't let me get in my house. He was like denying it. Like I had it, you know, so it was just so mean, you know. If he had kept up just the love bombing thing, I think I probably might have ended it back with him, but it was just too ridiculous. Like, so that started to open my eyes. Like, and then I started to read, like, Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft. I started to talk to domestic abuse agency advocates and start to understand like what this is, what happened here. And it was a period of my eyes opening and understanding, realizing what it was, that it was domestic abuse. And then my lawyer is like, do you want to file for divorce? I say, are you kidding me? Like, why do you think I hired you? Like, of course. So that's what it was. It was the time. That's it's so important for me to have had that time without him in my head. And that was because of the bail conditions. Thank God. That's, I think, what saved me.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. Cause I'm imagining the door cracking, you know, the life feeling threatened and still trying to protect the abuser. You know, don't arrest him, you know, even though your life was, you know, very much at risk, and you know, you'd already taken the steps to call 911. But that just speaks to me about how powerful domestic violence is and how deep the control lives, that even despite of your life being threatened, you know, that fear being elevated, then in a moment's notice, you're still apt to protect the abuser at any cost because you've been conditioned to do so. And that separation, you know, that moment of clarity, I guess I'll call it, for lack of a better term, where you had some separation, some clarity of thought, some time to reflect on what was happening, and still seeing those signs of what he really was, you know. So you kept seeing the angry nature, the controlling nature, the restrictive nature, and ultimately got yourself out. And I think that's so powerful, because I think we can help people, you know, pull that ripcord sooner, because, you know, as you've done the research for them, that you can now tell them that, you know, this isn't going to change. It's not going to get better. And the sooner you can get out, the better.
Do you believe that strongly, that it's not going to get better?
I do.
I do too. And do you think these guys can change?
You know, I think there's a class of people that can change. I think there's a class of people that choose not to change. And I think, you know, the amount of work that it takes for people to really change and become humble. I mean, I know from my own experience of having to go through, you know, changes in my own nature as a result of the things I chose to do to cope with the pain. I don't see many of them willing to really humble themselves and become insightful enough to really do the work. So I think if they did, I think that there's a therapeutic, you know, and a mental mindset, you know, way for people to heal their trauma and become insightful and make amends and right themselves. I just don't see many narcissists at that level really thinking that they need to do that. So they don't do the work.
What they do a lot of times, and mine did this, and a lot of people tell me that, like, I'll go to therapy. They always say, like, when they're trying to get the woman back, I'll go to therapy. It's not just going to therapy once or twice. As you said, it's a ton of work. They need 10 years of work before they're ready to have another relationship. So that just tells you right there.
That's what I'm talking. I went to therapy and I lied to my therapist. I'm not talking about the appearance of wanting to get better. I'm talking about the real hard, groundbreaking, soul crushing work that it takes to acknowledge the pain I've caused in other people's lives and look at the things I need to do differently, brick by brick, to rebuild those relationships. Stephen Covey says, my words cannot fix actions my behaviors caused. And I think that's what I always saw, is they just want their words to make things go away, but the behaviors never
Yeah.
change. So to answer your
Yeah.
question, I just haven't seen, in my experience, at least with my own father, and it sounds like with your ex-husband, there's the narcissism, the control, whatever the disorder, the sociopathic disorders, it prevents them from actually doing the actual soul crushing work, the heart crushing work of really changing. And so I just, I never, I tried to reestablish relationships with my dad on several occasions, and the animal.
You did?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And the animal, the animal would come out, the claws would come out, and I'd see his true nature. And it was then that I finally determined he'll never be safe enough for me to have a relationship with. And that's when I finally, just allowed the distance to stay between us, because it wasn't
that was a big move for you, a big move to separate and decide you're not going to see him anymore. So you made that decision.
I did. I had to, for my own health and well-being. I mean, it's, he lacked the insight necessary for me to feel safe. And I had made a decision that in my own life that I was going to seek safety, emotional, physical safety at any cost. And he wasn't safe
physically either. I mean, you feel like he could have killed you too.
Yeah. He always posed. I mean, it's interesting that you say that. And I don't know, how your children have experienced it, but for me, given that the abuse was directed at me and that it was physical, violent, and complex, and started when I was 5, I never, even as I became an adult male and my father became an old, frail, elderly man, I still felt, threatened by him.
Wow.
So it's a very pervasive and a very deep-seated, neural pathway that gets laid down, and it takes years to uncover, discover, and then discard.
When you're in it from birth. I mean, I married him when I was 27. I think my daughter pointed that out to me. I was 27 when I married him. She was born into it. And you were born into it.
Oh yeah.
You were born into it.
Yeah. And so, tell me about the catalyst for, having gone through a very public, in a very divisive, divorce, and then all of the things that fell out of that. And then, knowing how, his reputation had been tarnished and in the news and otherwise. And now you were ready to make a stand, and you decided to create Finding Our Voices. And if you could just share about the foundation, Finding Our Voices, what you're doing, how you're doing it. And, really, I think, as people have come to listen to this podcast because they feel stuck in some situation in their own lives, and they're looking for inspiration, motivation, and really a game plan to deal with their situation. After you've talked to us about Finding Our Voices, the kinds of things that you're finding the most useful to people that are in domestic violent relationships.
Well, I guess I'm a photojournalist, so I always do project after project. I even in my marriage, when I couldn't really express myself the way I wanted to, I still put 3 books out, of photos and stories. So I guess I thought about it in those terms. Like, I got out, women everywhere around me started, because it had been so public, came up to me and told me, it happened to me too. And these were people that I grew up with in my community. I've known them for 35 years, some of them. And so it was like, wow. And so I thought, this is really something. I've got to, expose this, or I've got to document it. So it started off as a photo project with portraits of women in my community who had identified to me that they had been through domestic abuse, but hadn't told anybody. And then it was audio too. I recorded their voice, them telling their stories. And so it was an exhibit at the Camden Public Library, my hometown, where you look at the portrait of the woman, the photo portrait, and it's got her name on it and a quote from her. And she wrote under her portrait something. And then you dial up a number and you listen to her telling her story. And that's what it was. And then there were 14 women in that, on the walls in the library. And the place was packed, and people were just really it just resonated. It had a big impact because there were people that people knew. There was the local architect. It was the local lady that ran the store. Just local people. So it's just been moving very quickly since then. Because of COVID, we needed to take it outdoors because people couldn't gather in community spaces and libraries anymore. So they became huge banners, and window banners. And so for the past year, we've gotten 1,600 plus huge banners featuring the face. We now have 35 women, and Mary Lou, we say from 18 to 81, and she's the 81-year-old. And they're on these banners, and they're called Say Something banners, and they're just traveling all over the state. And businesses, it's incredible. They're just saying yes, and they're posting these. Even, you know, a lot of them don't even put like flyers up, but they'll put these 2 foot by 4 foot posters up, and more now. And we've had great support from, you know, businesses and banks and everything. And it's just growing because it's just, I just think it's really resonating because we're survivor powered. That's what sets us apart. We're survivor powered, and it's our voices, it's our faces, it's our names, and we're standing proud and we're speaking loud, and we're not going to keep their dirty secrets anymore. And we've got nothing to be ashamed of, and people need to know what's happening. And the other thing we're doing is also pushing for legislative change, because when my ex was given this plea deal for everything that he did to me, and he got like a $3,000 fine. That was it. Like no jail time, because they considered it a first offense. He's 69 and he's arrested for domestic violence. Which 69-year-old who's been married for 29 years and is arrested for domestic violence, is it the first time? I don't think so. But they considered it a first offense. Anyway, so at the time I thought, you know, he's rich and famous and that's why he got this deal. And then I came to find out, no, that's how it works. And the district attorney even said this in a quote, but I didn't believe him. He said, Don McLean is not being treated any differently than anybody else. I was like, yeah, right. But it's true. And wow. I see that over and over again. They do not get held accountable. It's dismissed, it's dismissed, and it's dismissed. And so that's something that we are working on too. We're going to try to change that.
Well, thank goodness, because I think, you know, you'll speak to this better than I will, but I know from, you know, my own history that those incidents can lead to fatalities pretty quickly. You know, that you know, those slaps on the wrist don't work, and somebody that stays in that abusive relationship is really, their life is at risk.
Their life is at risk. That's why, as traumatic as it was for him to be arrested, I did not want him to be arrested. I didn't want anything to happen to him. I mean, I could have died that night, and if I had stayed with him, he would have killed me eventually, because it doesn't get better, it gets worse. And it's like you're living with a terrorist, you know, like what are the precautions this country is doing to protect us from terrorists? And here we are, children as well as adults, living with terrorists, minute to minute, day, hour and day. And we've got to realize that everyone's got to realize the danger. These guys, when they're caught or comes to the attention of the courts, they've got to be held accountable. It drives me crazy. They have these felony convictions for strangulation. They plead them down to misdemeanors. And now what's happened because of COVID, I just heard a police chief told me, they're like releasing all these people that have misdemeanors out on the streets from jail. So these guys, just because they've been pled down to a misdemeanor, are we not even going to serve any time that they got? You know, it's just, there's so many ramifications of this.
Standing proud and speaking loud, that is an understatement. I'm so thankful for the role that you and the foundation are playing in this world. I think, you know, as evidence today, if somebody is in an abusive relationship, if somebody's starting to see those warning signs flashing, you know, what are the things that you're counseling, that you're advising, that the foundation is helping these women to find? Is it just finding the courage to leave? Is it just really at the end of the day, just finding a courage to have the self-worth and the self-esteem, or at least? Well,
I don't know about finding the courage, because again, thinking back on it, like we're afraid for a reason, and leaving is the most dangerous time. Like I was telling him I was leaving him. That's when he almost killed me the last time. So we know the situation better than anybody else, right? We know what we're in and how to manage it. So I guess the best advice would be, like on our website, findourvoices.net, you know, under we have these power and control wheels, but you know, it's a common thing in the domestic abuse field. They have this something called the power and control wheel, and you just look all around it and you just see it, like, wow, like print it out if it's safe for you to do so, get some colored pencils and just go around and underline the things that pertain, write in some details. I think the key, what I would say to somebody is say something. Really, that's the number one thing, is say something, because it's not like you can get out right away necessarily. It's not like you're ready to get out right away. But if you say something and start talking and tell somebody about it, that is the first step. When you voice it, I think that is the first step to opening that door and getting out.
Yeah, very powerful. I know that, and I think everybody who's been on this podcast, everybody who's shared their overcome story has emphasized the exact same first step, which is asking for help. Tell somebody, take it out of the shadows, give it a life, give it a voice, and ultimately name it. Yeah, name it. Wow, thank you. Thank you so much.
And then the advice I would say to someone who's hearing it on the other end is don't judge, because if someone tells you something, I think the best thing you can do is just for them to know that you're there for them, that you love them, that you value them, you think they're, and be a reality check. That's okay. They tell you things like, that's not, you shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't be doing that. But be there for them so that they can continue to talk to you. Because if you are like, leave this guy, like, why are you with him? Then they won't keep talking to you, and they need someone they know they can talk to if it gets really bad, right? So just, you want to keep the dialogue open. So I would say, just don't be judgmental, just be understanding, be loving, be there for them.
Wow, that's great advice for both the person doing the talking and the person doing the listening, is to be a non-judgmental sounding board for somebody, and give them the proper feedback, and know that what they're going through is real, and that community and that connection, can be the first hand that leads somebody out of that pain when they're ready. And Patrisha, I know we're pressed for time. You got two lovely kids that are coming to visit you up there in Camden, Maine. And I'm excited for that. And I know we've gotten to see each other now a few times over Zoom and a few phone calls, and I cannot wait to meet you in person. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your vulnerability, and thank you for helping so many victims find their voice.
And I'm going to put that right back at you, Charlie. You do every single one of those things, and I really admire you. And I thank you very much for what you're doing.
Thanks, Patrisha. We'll talk soon.